Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FTX podcast. Really happy to have here with me today a friend and colleague, Nathaniel Whittemore. Welcome, man.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Yeah, how does it feel to be on the other side of the microphone for once?
It's good, man. It's always fun. I love kind of stepping out because, every day I get to say whatever I'm thinking sort of in a scripted way, but obviously it's much different than having a conversation.
Absolutely. And for those that, may not be familiar with you, would you mind giving a quick introduction?
Sure. So I'm Nathaniel, NLW on all the social networks. I host a podcast called The Breakdown, which is a daily podcast about what I term big picture power shifts. So crypto, Bitcoin are key pieces of that, but we also dig into kind of macro and all sorts of things, even kind of touch on some politics stuff. And I've been doing that for a while. And then I was consulting with a company called Blockfolio when it got acquired by FTX. And so for the last couple of years, I've also been at FTX helping with marketing, particularly on the brand narrative, storytelling, advertising side.
And that's a helping is a small way of putting it. This man here has been helping us lead the charge on everything. So very much appreciated. I do want to get into the breakdown as well, but what I'd like to start with is your crypto origin story. Like, I know you've been in crypto for a while. I want to know where your imagination was sparked and where that all began.
Sure. So I think like a lot of people had a near miss and then a reconnection later. So I was in San Francisco between around 2008, 2009 to 2017 and doing the startup thing. I was a VC for a while. I, had my own companies. And when in 2012, I was advising a company that was going through Y Combinator at the same time as Coinbase. And, so they were talking about how the founders of that company had just given everyone, Bitcoin on a thumb drive or something like that at their like most recent dinner. And I was like, I should spend a little time checking that out or looking into it. And I kind of never did. And to the extent that I paid attention at all in Silicon Valley at that time, the predominant narrative of Bitcoin was just as a payments technology, right? So ironically now, considering how far the company has come, it was like a competitor to Square, right? And that wasn't a super interesting problem to me. Plus, I think that when you're in hyper-focused startup scenes, you get real tunnel vision to every other type of problem that you're not working on, right? I mean, I certainly feel that way. Like I'm not paying attention to what's going on in, lots of sectors outside of crypto, given how focused here I am. So in either case, I kind of, didn't really spend a lot of time with it. And it wasn't actually until I left San Francisco in 2017. And that was kind of a reevaluation moment anyways. My wife and I had moved back to the East Coast. We wanted to do the family thing. We were reevaluating a lot of like what we were spending our time on. And so I was kind of surveying the landscape and the world of things that I might want to spend time on. And obviously at 2017, there was sort of the, huge explosion of ICOs and things like that. But that wasn't actually what hooked me back in. That was definitely what got me to kind of pay attention again. I had a lot of friends who were kind of, exploring the space and things like that. But when I kind of stepped away and was looking at it, kind of fresh, I guess, what actually excited me about it was sort of a reconnection with an earlier part of my life, which was that when I was in college, the big thing that I was spending my time on was sort of global youth impact. So I went to school just after September 11th. I started college in 2002. So I was at Northwestern from 2002 to 2006. And after September 11th, there was a huge explosion of people who wanted to go abroad, right? Because the rest of the world had quite literally just come crashing into the United States. And there were a lot of people who felt, as I felt at that time, that, the sort of story of the end of history and the world being fine and hunky-dory post-Cold War that had been kind of normalized for us growing up in the 90s was quite clearly not the complete story. And so tons of people wanted to go abroad, and a big portion of those people actually wanted to volunteer abroad, right? So they weren't just trying to go, kind of learn, they wanted to do things. And what I found when I had gone abroad, I'd done a similar thing myself. I'd gone to Egypt and started working with Sudanese refugees. The ability for young people to kind of actually make a difference was such a infinitesimal drop in the hat that it was enraging almost, right? And so you had all these people coming back from these first experiences where they were trying to do something good, saying that was completely ineffectual, it was useless, but I don't want to just kind of leave it there. I want to do something. And the kind of standard answer that a lot of those folks got was, well, go get a degree in development studies, or something like that, some version of go study more. And it seemed ludicrous to me that an entire generation was kind of standing up and raising their hands and saying we want to do something, and even more than that, saying we want to do something and we realize that the kind of normal ways to do it are not effective, so we'd like to be better than that. And their answer was go study more stuff. So I created basically a whole program design center at Northwestern to help students be better at making an impact. And that was what originally had brought me out to San Francisco. I was working with change.org when it first got off the ground. But kind of along the way, as technology will do, I got kind of lost in the mass of all sorts of other different things, and I kind of lost some of those social change roots. And so this is a long-winded way of getting back to the point that in 2017, when I started revisiting Bitcoin again, I started to look at it through the lens not of how are you going to pay for coffee at your VC pitch meeting, at Coupa Cafe in Palo Alto in 2012, which is where I had kind of first thought about it. And instead, man, wouldn't it have been amazing if the Sudanese refugees that I had been working with in Cairo in 2004 had access to this sort of highly portable, hard to seize, asset that they could carry wealth with as they fled in kind of one of the worst circumstances that can befall a human. So that's kind of what reconnected me in. And then obviously subsequent to that, there's been tons of things in this industry that have kind of pulled me further and further. But that was sort of the origin story. And so in 2017, late 2017, early 18, I basically just said, I'm going to consult with companies that I like. I'm going to focus exclusively on crypto, and I'm going to do kind of the marketing communication stuff that I'd always done. And the funny thing about it is that it seems kind of stupid to do marketing communications consulting right after the ICO boom, when there's not a lot of people with money left. But it turns out there were fewer marketing consultants than there were companies left, and so it was actually kind of like a good way to and a quiet, honestly, way to kind of come into the space. And so that's kind of where I started. And as I was doing that, I started creating my own content, which led to a Twitter thread thing that I did that helped people kind of learn who I was, that transitioned to an email, that eventually transitioned to the podcast, which obviously I've been doing ever since.
There's something you touched on there that actually I'm really curious about, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about before we go into crypto, which is youth impact in the world, because it's something myself as a youth I struggle with at times. And I struggle with thinking of ways that I can, not only improve my own life, but improve the life of like my immediate circle, my family, my friends, but also just people in general. And I'd be curious, like with the time you've spent thinking about this, what you think nowadays are kind of powerful ways that youth can make impact in the world.
So I think that the step one is basically just what you articulated, which is actually spending time to think thoughtfully through it and have intention, right? Like that was a step that a lot of people kind of hadn't taken at that time. People didn't have the space to think about what their kind of philosophy of change was, right? There are lots and lots of different competing theories for how to make a difference, or the right way to make a difference, or the right lever to pull to make a difference. Not all of them are mutually exclusive, of course, but kind of actually spending time thinking about, is my vehicle for making an impact through community organizing because I like being close and getting my hands dirty? Are the things that I'm passionate close by or far away? And if so, and whatever the answer is, why is that? Those are kind of the first set of just very fundamental questions. And I think related to that is one of the things that seemed very clear to me is that it was going to be a not so sustainable approach if everyone had to have the same answer in terms of, for them personally, what the right way to make a difference was, right? Mm-hmm. And this is something that's interesting. Obviously, Sam is one of the more public business figures who has discussed this sort of journey for himself, right? I think that, certainly from my perspective, it would have been a tragedy if the only reasonable answer, the only answer that was accepted by impact communities or the world at large for a person like Sam who wanted to make a difference was be hands-on in some sort of close community setting. Obviously, that would have massively underutilized what he had to do coming through kind of the lens that he has of business building, wealth building, and philanthropy and effective altruism. So, I think that kind of getting past the stigma of there's a right or wrong way, but actually being interested in sort of where the alignment of the right way for me, plus the things that I am particularly passionate about on a level that kind of go beyond for whatever reason, plus actual efficacy, and in impact circles, the conversation about how to measure impact and things like that has been growing and growing and growing. It continues to grow. It's better now than it was in 2002, but it still has a long way to go. So it's not a super useful answer in terms of like, you just go do X, Y, or Z, but I certainly think it's a lot better now than it was, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And you spoke about being in Egypt with Sudanese refugees, with Sudan's had a really, really, really rough ride of it for a long time now. What were you doing at that time? And like, what do you think may have been more effective to be doing, or what you were doing effective?
Yeah. So the short answer is yes and no in in a very classical way. So it wasn't like there was a ton of intention. Like before I studied abroad, I was like, I'm going to go work on the Sudanese refugee crisis that includes both, people from Darfur, but also from, drought issues that they'd had, the couple of years before either. I knew that I wanted to go to the Middle East because I thought that coming out of school, I was going to work on Middle Eastern peace and conflict issues. I went to Cairo and Egypt specifically. I'd always been interested in Cairo, but the reason I went there versus Lebanon versus wherever else or Jordan was that they had the only program where you could just enroll in the university, right? So I didn't want to do like an 8-week program that was kind of scripted and kind of day to day. I just wanted to be a student in the place. American University in Cairo allowed for that, right? So that was kind of like the extent of the intention on that front. Mm-hmm. When I got there, is when I was kind of like, I want to do something while I'm here that's sort of meaningful or impactful. And I don't even remember how I first learned about Sudanese refugee issues there. I think I kind of just literally stumbled into it, like walking by, because we walked everywhere, walked by this church that was that was doing it. And so basically all I was doing was helping people study English. And what was profound about that was it seems like such a small kind of thing, right? But, speaking English is a thing that can help people get a lever up on their refugee applications. It's still bad, but at the time it was like the number of people who are actually going to get replaced, or repatriated into a different place versus just being in this kind of, forever holding area of Cairo was incredibly small. So everyone was banking on that chance. And, we had 2 or 3 volunteers and literally lines out the door for 15 minutes of kind of like, help on. It was basically, they had questions from their kind of workbooks or whatever that they were working through, and we'd help answer them. So it wasn't sort of like a lesson or anything. It was just like literally just kind of, you get 15 minutes to ask questions. And so seeing people who are like waiting for 2, 3, 4 hours in line, for the chance to just kind of improve infinitesimally on this thing that they were working hard on was a pretty profoundly affecting experience. And so when I say that it was sort of useful and not useful, or effective and not effective at the same time, it was certainly, better than nothing for the set of people, the small handful of people that each week I got to help, or each, every couple of days I got to help, but obviously did nothing to impact any sort of structural issue, right? And I think for me, it certainly helped me start to understand that the lever in for change for me, I think, is less about, not to the exclusion of, but certainly less about that sort of super hands-on work, and much more about discussing and hopefully impacting conversations that shape the power systems that create problems in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. So there are so many that go into this. One, refugee politics is a very kind of basic one. How people are repatriated, what the systems are, how open that is, what the qualifications are. All of those are big, open, challenging questions. But then even more fundamental to that, the systems that kind of perpetuate conflict, famine, et cetera, that kind of lead to the creation of refugee crises in the first place, right? It becomes a sort of, rushing nesting dolls of ever bigger and growing problem. So anyways, it was helpful for me to kind of understand that, but ultimately, obviously, pretty limited in what impact I had while I was actually there in the fall of 2004.
Okay, I'm going to make a huge leap because something just like connected in my mind. So I do actually think that like these object level things that you did, even if in the grand scheme of things don't seem that large, actually have like this butterfly effect of, you know, 1 in 30 people you helped got their application approved. They were able to move to the United States. They were able to make a saving. They were able to send enough money back to Sudan to facilitate their entire family of 40, 50 people. And like, I think those things do slowly have repercussions. But the leap I made is like, you actually made me think in a completely different context, but of the early days of FTX and getting people to come and use the platform. It was like super object level, hand holding people so that they would know how to use the platform. It was like a ton of tiny little things that were always adding up to get people to like, you know, change their behaviors and be part of this. When you arrived, like when Blockfolio acquisition happened, you started like, in my memory, if it's correct, you started helping impose systems so that things would be more effective and more generalized across the space. How did you think about that? Like you arrived, you saw that we were doing a ton of little things, little influencers here, talking to these people, doing guides. How do you come and look at a system like that and then say, okay, actually, this is how we operationalize it so that we have further impact across the board?
So yeah, it's actually interesting. This idea that sort of the short answer is that there's no and or, there's only both and when it comes to real life, and you know, whether that's business or impact or anything else. So when we got here, when Blockfolio arrived on the FTX scene, the audience had been so specific and discreet in some ways, right? It was pockets of traders that you guys knew really well. It was a very business development oriented approach to marketing, right? Which is completely makes sense for where the company was at that time. And so, you know, a lot of the beginning days were kind of just learning those systems, learning what had worked, learning what, you know, hadn't worked, what had been tried, you know, all those kind of little pieces. And then starting to ask, like, what are the pieces that we could kind of add into that mix or instill into that mix? And, you know, the interesting thing about marketing is that you can kind of look at it as like, you could write down on post-it notes every different type of marketing you could do, and kind of both broad and then more narrow categories underneath it. And to some extent for startups, no matter kind of, you know, young companies, right? Companies that are not mature, that are still rapidly evolving, even if they're big and evolving, it's almost like picking and choosing and deciding which pieces of marketing you're going to actually do and which ones you're not going to invest so much in. And it tends not to be as easily scriptable as right or wrong, right? In the sense that I would argue that a big brand building aspect of FTX has been Sam in particular, but other executives now too who have followed that lead, like Brett, being public about their thoughts in long form ways that are much more kind of intimate and of the mediums that our community traffics in, like Twitter, than other types of CEOs. However, you know, other exchange CEOs, it would be the wrong idea for them to say, okay, cool, because that worked for FTX to help them build brand, your CEO has to write threads on not just crypto, but other complex things that they're thinking about, and analyze the financials of other companies, and, you know, talk about impact. And, you know, like it just wouldn't come off the right way. And it just so happens that that's been a thing that kind of resonated and worked for us. And I think in a lot of ways, the kind of the story or the history of FTX, just from a marketing perspective, at least since I got here, was experimenting and figuring out kind of which of these different approaches are kind of authentic to us, which resonate with our audience, which are achieving the objectives we have, which frankly is a lot of often revisiting after we've done a thing, what our objectives really were, or what we were glad happened, even if we hadn't articulated as an objective in the first place. You know, interestingly, people tend to think of kind of experimentation in very laboratory or scientific ways, where it's like thesis, you know, like test the thesis, you know, see if it worked, revisit the thesis. And I think it's not, unfortunately, even that clean, in the sense that sometimes you do a thing because you have an instinct that thing would be valuable, and you were right, but not in the ways that you thought it was valuable for other reasons. And that helps you refine what the thesis might have been in the first place. So, you know, that's a very kind of vague and long-winded, but I think that it's sort of the broad, the vibe of marketing since I've been here.
No, and I think that actually like describes marketing pretty well in general, because it's such an amorphous sort of word. It means so many different things. So would you kind of distill it to experimentation with a continual refinement process of consolidating what the results were with what the initial thesis was over and over and over until you like have a formula that works?
I think so. Not just so yes, and not just until you have a formula, but until you start to have almost like the segments of marketing become discrete enough and you have enough conviction around them that you can isolate them and kind of let them be off on their own terms, right? So at the beginning, you're just kind of like, you don't sit down and you're like, okay, we've got influencer marketing, content marketing, social content marketing, paid performance advertising, brand marketing. You just kind of have whatever combination of those things the small handful of people can do, right? And so they usually kind of do all of them. As things mature, you start to segment it off because it turns out that although they have obviously a hugely overlapping relationship, something like brand marketing is very different than performance advertising. It has a different set of objectives. It has a different set of requirements, expertise is needed to do it well, platforms that you use to do it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that in some ways, part of the kind of evolutionary process is understanding at what point it's time to start segmenting things off and giving them kind of their own space to have exclusive focus that is really leaning in and kind of resourcing behind it as well. That's really focused on what those particular pieces of marketing or advertising are trying to do.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'd be curious to hear a little bit about your experience with the progression of this experimentation at FTX. When you joined, I think it was a very, very, very different scenario than where we're at now. I'd be curious to hear kind of how you started dealing with it and where you see it now. Like if you think of FTX's marketing, like what do you think of?
Sure. So I think there was a key inflection point moment sort of around the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021, when we decided that it was time to really start to introduce the US market, retail investors, kind of a different set of actual users to FTX than we had before. And we didn't use terms brand advertising versus performance advertising versus endorsements versus like we kind of like we use some of those words, but they didn't mean what other people would have thought that they meant. They were just kind of like the linguistic cues that we use. And really it was Cambrian explosion of shortcutting and supercharging and super speeding how fast people get to know who we are. And so, it was in many ways brand focused first, and then all the sort of other things started to spin around that, right? But doing these kind of big endorsement deals, those are obviously very brand focused things. And it's not that there aren't impressions that you can count when Tom Brady tweets about us or number of people who saw an ad that we made or anything like that. But the end goal is not a specific set of kind of numbers that get spun out of that Rube Goldberg machine to help us know how it performed from a kind of a user acquisition standpoint. It's when I walked down the street when we were just meeting our neighbors for the first time, and he said, "Oh, you're the Tom Brady exchange," right? Like that's kind of the goal. And obviously that's very hard to quantify. And to some extent you have to a little bit use instinct. There are lots of ways and companies that try to quantify that. And we work with lots of people who do good work there. So I don't want to diminish the numbers aspect of brand, but it's obviously about something a little bit different. However, the company is also maturing rapidly in terms of all the things, that do involve data and numbers in terms of performance advertising, in terms of, how we create funnels that kind of get people, activated. And I think the interesting thing is crypto, much more than other industries, frankly, I mean, basically any other industry, is so cyclical that what's going on outside of the company has a much more deterministic impact on what you do inside the company. And it requires a sort of nimbleness that is very, very different from other things, right? It really does not allow for, you can plan out theoretical scenarios that are sort of ceteris paribus scenarios, right? Where if all things held equal, we can do it like this. But in practice, thing X happens that totally changes things, that creates, a total market shift one way or another. And it very much changes the dynamic into which not just brand or social or content marketing comes, but also performance advertising and what people are going to click on and look at. So, to some extent, I think there's been a simultaneous sort of maturation of the FTX infrastructure for marketing and kind of the different pieces and how they fit together, but also how they function individually and on their own terms, while at the same time the industry has been going through this kind of transition from bull to bear.
Mm-hmm. And how do you like map this out mentally for yourself when you're thinking about, because as you said, now there's like pretty distinct segments working on different things. My sense is you have a pretty good overview of this entire umbrella. How do you coordinate the pieces? Like what's the instinct that says, okay, we need to go stronger on this for now and then stronger on this for now? Or is it again experimentation and seeing what's working at what times?
It's a little bit of experimentation. I think that to some extent a couple things. One is we've just over the last 6 months, there are more people specializing in more parts, right? So we've gone from a pure generalists to actually some amount of specialization. We still are like way higher on generalists who play, the role of specialists than just pure specialists, because I think that that's better suited to the stage we're at, right? Where it may be that the thing that a person specializes in isn't the thing that we should be doing for the next X number of months. And so they really need, if they're going to keep adding value, they need to be able to do other things. But we still, I think one piece of this answer is, to the extent that you have specialization, even of focus, the people who are specializing in an area are the front lines of saying we should be doing more or less of this right now, right? Mm-hmm. And I have specific examples kind of from my perspective. But then I think the other thing is there's some amount that's just kind of by the nature of the market cycle again in this and where we are as a company, where there are different and kind of righter or wronger ways to build a brand, I think, based on marketing cycles. But no matter how much we've done, no matter how many Super Bowl ads we've done or, whatever, like we're still very young, and a lot of brand recognition is just repetition, right? So there's never really been a moment where it's like, oh, we can stop doing brand now because a sufficient number of people know who we are, just by virtue of the fact that we've been on the scene for so much shorter than other people in the space and just the average company that people interact with, right? So brand kind of has to stay. I think when it comes to a lot of the other dimensions, to some extent, a lot of it's like listening to the market and what the data is telling you, right? Performance advertising is going to give you lots of really, really good data very quickly about how, paid performance ads focused on topic X or topics Y are, or with keyword X or keyword Y are performing relative to those keywords 6 months ago. And so you might have a thesis that says, hey, people are probably less interested in this product or feature or whatever than they might have been 6 months ago. But you can get really good feedback very quickly that either affirms or denies that. So you get to a point where you get to start being not just instinct led, but data led a little bit too.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on something that I think is most marketeers' dream, which is the Super Bowl ad, known as probably one of the largest marketing moments in the world, if not the largest marketing moment. You were a central figure, not the leading figure, for getting our Super Bowl ad out into the world. I've had you tell me this story once on a Twitter space, and I will have you tell me again, but I want to hear the story. I want to hear, where did this come from? What was the motivation? How was it structured? And then maybe we can dive into some other things.
Sure. So I think let's start. I'll try to tell pieces maybe that I haven't told too, but let's start with the do a Super Bowl ad or not, right? And this is a thing that a lot of people, I think, get wrong with their mental models of doing it, right? So if you see like kind of Twitter discourse or whatever about Super Bowl ads, and this is completely outside of crypto and just in general, people always focus on how much it costs. Like this ad costs X, which in a vacuum seems like so high, right? Oh my God, how can you possibly spend X millions of dollars for 30 seconds of airtime? That just seems crazy. What I think that analysis doesn't take into consideration, one, on a very basic level, it doesn't take into consideration like the number of people actually watching those ads, right? Because there is sort of a dollars and cents. It's like, if you're going to get X people with an ad that costs $100,000, but then, 50x that with the number, with an ad that costs $5 million, that's the same ratio, right? So there's that piece. But I think the more important piece is that, at least in America, the Super Bowl is the literal one moment each year that people not only are not annoyed with ads, but it is an active part of the experience that they're having and that they're excited. It is not a thing that is interrupting them, annoyingly distracting them for the thing that they came for, but has become part of the cultural experience. And that, I think, has a value that is so differentiated. That I think it's really, it doesn't mean that every company should run Super Bowl ads. Obviously, I think it's really well suited for big brand building types of things versus kind of articulating features and stuff like that. But I think that people underestimate how different it is to have an ad air in a context where people are excited to watch it and in fact want to deeply engage with it, right? Where that's the thing for some meaningful percentage of people that don't even care that much about the game, but they're going to go to their family or friends' parties. Like, that's the thing that they're excited about. That's what they're kind of watching and rooting for. So that I think is hugely differentiated. And so anyways, this is probably the perspective that I was bringing into FTX. And I never would have kind of like pushed a Super Bowl ad if it wasn't the right fit. But I remember very early on, like when we were first having these conversations of what's the biggest impact we can have in the shortest amount of time, right? And we were just throwing out ideas on some of these, what are now called all hands, but I think at the time were just kind of like the calls that we did, fairly frequently. I remember it was like very near to the game. And I think I could be totally wrong, but my memory is that Sam was like, well, have we thought about doing a Super Bowl ad? And we're talking like literally 3 weeks before the Super Bowl or something. And, we kind of moved off that idea pretty quickly for practical reasons. This is 2020 or 2021, not 2022. But I remember thinking that that it was something that we had, at least kind of talked about for a moment at the beginning of this process. Now we got kind of, quickly focused on other things, the stadium renaming and, kind of a couple other vectors of partnerships and endorsements. But over last summer, we brought the conversation back up to should we do a Super Bowl ad? And if so, what are we trying to achieve? And, we kind of quickly landed on, if we were going to do it, we were not going to kind of just be quiet and get some extra press for it or whatever. We were going to try to win the damn thing, right? We wanted to have the best ad, and that was sort of the starting point. I'll pause there because we can talk more about the details, but our starting point was, if we're going to do it, let's do everything that we can to make it a competitor for the best ad of the year.
What's crazy with that though is that it hasn't defined or refined anything really outside of the fact that you're doing a Super Bowl ad. You still have the entire open world of possibilities of what the fuck do you do for this Super Bowl ad. So how the heck do you go from an entire world of possibilities to figuring out what we did?
Well, that, by the way, that is like the most painful, difficult thing for creative partners like agencies that you have pitch, because they're like, well, what do you want to say about yourself? And it's like, well, the criteria is that it's just the best ad, right? And I think that the interesting thing is, so we kind of had a multi-part process where we spent a lot of time internally thinking up our own ideas and stuff that we thought would be good. We had agencies that we work with most closely on, we had at that time produced 2 or 3 national ads, and so we worked with the agencies that we work with those on, and they kind of had a leg up because they knew us a little bit better. And then we also invited a set of other agencies to pitch, because with something like the Super Bowl, even if we love our own agencies, it's like you kind of just, you want to go wide and get the best possible ideas. And honestly, we just spent like each time we kind of had pitch sessions, whether they were internal or involving external partners, it helped refine what we wanted to say or what we wanted to do. But frankly, we were kind of always looking for just like the idea that instantly hit. Now, I think that one thing that we had kind of to our benefit creatively is that we weren't really just going to be advertising FTX in the sense that there's no world in which we're going to talk about how our fees compared to Coinbase's fees or something like that, right?
Mhm.
We're really advertising crypto. So like kind of the goal is like, be the best at kind of making crypto fun, appealing, different, whatever, right? And so, you know, at least we had the ability to draw creatively from like, well, what do people think about crypto now? How can we play with that? And that's the context into which the idea for this ad, where a skeptic throughout history keeps saying no to things that go on to be very important, comes to be. And the interesting thing about it is that it was from the beginning, the image that was used to kind of first pitch it was Larry David, and that was immediately the sort of the only person that we were interested in having do it. And the challenge with that is that throughout his long and illustrious career, Larry had never said yes to an ad, ever, not once, not a single time. And so even though Dentsu, our agency, had pitched it to us kind of like, imagine someone like Larry, they kind of shot themselves in the foot a little bit, because we were like, no, imagine Larry exactly. And they were like, well, but there's this context where he's never said yes. And we were like, okay, well, like our feeling was, if he ultimately says no, if we can't make it work, I mean, we very shortly considered a couple other people. We were basically like, we'll go back to the drawing board and find the right ad for someone else to figure out what, you know, what it is. But it turns out he liked the ad, and I remember the first meeting that we had with him. Signals were kind of positive that he was at least taking a meeting, which was a step that they had never gotten to before. And we had no idea what to expect. There are a few of us on the call. Sina, I'm sure, has probably told you about this story as well. But when the call started, we didn't know whether it was going to be, it was a Zoom meeting. We didn't know whether it was going to be like, okay, I like this, but not this, or, you know, could we do this piece differently? Instead, it was Larry and Jeff Schaefer, who's his director at Curb, with two legal pads, these yellow legal pads, with just pages and pages and pages of scenarios that they had come up with based on this context of people saying no to things. And they basically just live read their ideas, making each other laugh for like 20 minutes. And that was the meeting. So I think we had a pretty strong sense right from that there was something that had a lot of potential.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't realize how serendipitous that was. I knew it was hard to get Larry David, but I didn't realize that. So this was his first time doing a full scale
first commercial ever. Yep.
Wow.
Not just a Super Bowl ad, an ad, period.
Right. I mean, and what a way to do an ad, the first ad, or maybe the last ad ever, than doing a Super Bowl ad. I mean, from his perspective, that's pretty legendary too. And okay, so you go into this production phase. I remember we went over this once, and you said there's just a ton of different little pieces that need to be managed to make sure everything is meshing in correctly together, which I'm sure was an infinite amount of work for you. Everything gets put together. So what's the story with the ad space? If I remember correctly, there wasn't enough time left, and you guys had to do some magic to get enough time for the Super Bowl ad.
So originally we bought a 30-second spot, and it became very clear very quickly that it needed a 60-second spot. Larry never went so far as to say, I'm not going to do it if you don't get a 60-second spot. But he, as close as he could, like he was basically, he basically said, don't screw this up in so many words, not even really so many words, just with like a look, you know, that it needed 30 seconds. And so the way that it works is when you buy Super Bowl ads, first come, first serve in terms of the time in the game, right? So the first quarter goes first, then the second quarter, then the third quarter, then the fourth quarter. It's pretty much how it works. And we originally had a spot at the beginning of the fourth quarter. It was like the first ad break at the beginning of the fourth quarter. When we bought the second 30 spot, there were only a few of these kind of like little, units left. And what they do then is they combine them, but they call it a floater. And so we had a 60-second floater, and we didn't know when in the game it was going to be. It could have been the last ad break of the fourth quarter if the game was a runaway, walloping, right? So, it was really, really, really risky. And so that was kind of the genesis of where the giveaway campaign that we ran alongside it came from, where we were trying to turn kind of a disadvantage to an advantage. So the campaign, for people who weren't watching that game, was basically, for every minute of the game, we'd give away that much in Bitcoin. Whatever the time in the game was when the ad ran, we would give away that much in Bitcoin. So if the ad ran at 9:38, we'd give away 9.38 Bitcoin to 4 winners, was the idea. If the ad ran at 7:15, we give away 7.15 Bitcoin. And we had kind of a countdown clock. We filmed kind of promos with that with people. We also hadn't shown the ad in advance, which is something that's very out of sync with how people do things now. People usually, it's too risky in their estimation to have the ad just be at the game. They're worried that people won't know it. So they start releasing the ads a couple weeks before the game, and they try to do marketing campaigns around them. We didn't do that because we thought we had a good enough ad that it could just kind of be on its own. So anyways, we had these little teasers that showed people kind of in these old costumes, but you had no idea what was going on. And basically the hook was, when the ad actually aired, we'd tweet, you retweeted it, you responded to it, and 4 people would win. And that campaign actually ended up having us be the most retweeted brand of the Super Bowl. And so I have a cool little bottle of Don Julio that Twitter gave me that has my handle on it for that, which is nice. But yeah, it was a great example of kind of anything. I mean, when it comes to marketing, anything that's shitty can also be an opportunity. It's just, you gotta have to frame it right. And it's not so much everything happens for a reason. It's more just like, you have to be resilient and use what you've got, even if it's not ideal.
I know you were saying like the numbers on these things are hard to quantify, but what were the numbers on the Super Bowl ad? Like, how many people saw it?
The number, so we actually, when it ended up happening, was the ad break between the second quarter and the halftime show, which is literally, if you look at viewership, could not have been more peak during. So we had something like 80 or 90 million people who saw it just during the game. We had millions of impressions on the Twitter video, had tens of millions of impressions on the YouTube video. But then, like, from the other piece of this, the X factor is press. So we were, I can't even remember how many outlets, but press quantifications are very kind of silly, but we had billions of impressions of people who hit articles that were discussing or referencing it. We were on all 4 big morning shows the next day, which is something that is not usual for an ad. So we have clips of kind of all the hosts talking about the spot. So there was a lot of coverage around it. A lot of people saw it.
I mean, on YouTube, it has 50 million views, which is like insane, honestly. It super quickly got it there too, which means I think, and for the listeners, I mean, if you go to the FTX official YouTube channel and you find this video, it's not even people that like crypto. A lot of them hate crypto, but they're just saying this ad is the best ad we've ever seen. Oh, wait. Okay. I actually want to talk about South Park. So how did you feel? How did you feel when South Park made a parody? I thought that was hilarious.
So in advertising, there's like a ton of different awards. And actually the ad won a lot of different awards. It won golden pencils and, all these sort of very, very awesome things that we were very honored about. But the big like ad awards are the Cannes Lions, right? It's an event that happens in Cannes every year. It happens, so the Cannes Festival of Creativity kicks off with the film festival that everyone knows about, but then it goes through a bunch of others, and the advertising industry's version of it happens in June every year, is the big one. And so obviously, the all our creative partners were like really gunning for a Cannes Lion, and I thought it would have been fun to kind of roll in and do that because we're such a non-traditional advertiser. But we didn't end up getting. We got shortlisted for a couple categories, which was nice. But when I saw South Park making fun of us, it was honestly better than winning Cannes Golden Lion, because it's such a cultural touchstone. And I will note that in addition to the Larry piece, they also stole our UN concept as the framework for all the ads. So they kind of mashed everyone in crypto together. But yeah, I thought it was great. I think I tweeted like, all right, I can retire now, basically.
Yeah, that was so funny. It's so good. I mean, and now it's just forever, right? It's become this permanent thing in the history books. I guess last question on the marketing front for you, Nathaniel, is what is next for FTX on marketing? How do you see sort of this department growing along its different verticals?
So I think one is exactly what you just said. Every week that goes on, there's sort of more specialization, not necessarily, like I said, in terms of pure specialists coming in to just do one type of thing over and over and over again, but just in terms of kind of like, okay, we know this team is a little bit more focused on content. This team is a little bit more focused on performance advertising. Those people bring in, kind of, internal team or the right partners to work on it. So I think that's going to continue to proceed. I think from a brand perspective, we're going to continue to keep building out, kind of the brand and storytelling and introducing the world to who we are. I think there's a very strong sense that although we've done good work to kind of, repetitify the way that people learn about us, there's a lot more to be done. I think that the interesting challenges and kind of exciting things will be around how we introduce people to the idea of FTX as not just crypto, as we add more products in the financial space. This is something that you've seen Sam tweeting about a lot. Obviously, we've added stocks. We have a card. We have all sorts of different kind of transfer features that are, highly useful for things that are outside of crypto trading. And I think, telling that story in ways that are simple, compact, understandable, and resonant are going to be really fun. And then I think, the crypto industry itself will continue to throw its own curveballs around, how we market, storytell. And so, I don't anticipate that changing anytime soon either.
Sounds right. I'm excited to see it grow. It's really good to have you here working with us on all of this. I want to hear there's a couple of questions for you. So one is, what would you be the most excited to see the crypto space evolve into? Like, what is an ideal scenario that crypto turns into for you in the next 5 to 10 years?
I don't know that I have, I guess I have maybe a slightly different.
Yeah, frame it however you want.
A lot of people. Yeah. So I think that a lot of people are understandably cynical about how much of the loudness of crypto, especially at peaks of cycles, is about making money, right? I think the thing that maybe people don't kind of spend as much time on or appreciate is that, one, it's an inherently financial technology, so that there's always going to be that, right? It is much more. I mean, it is literally a re-examination and exploration of how value can be transferred in different ways. That is inherently going to create a lot more discourse and motivation around money and value being transferred. Versus just take random Web 2 technology, right? Social, networks or something like that. So it's less gauche than it seems, just because it's kind of built into what it is, right? Like if people are trying to reinvent money, of course they're going to talk about money a lot. Of course, a lot of people are going to come because they think the reinvention of money is going to have a lot of money in it, right? So that's part one. Is I'm a little less turned off maybe than some are by that. But a second piece is that if you look at the people who stick around, and right now is a really good time. Almost everyone comes in moments of number go up, or from some sort of FOMO reason, or because they've got a friend who says it's the future, right? Like I would say that the average pattern of a person who sticks with the industry and stays there for a long time is they come in through the door of the number going up and there being excitement, and then they find within it something that speaks to them that's really exciting and differentiated to them. I think we had a massive example of this right now. NFTs are going through this, right? Where a ton of people came in because these fucking pictures were worth like your house. And like, that's unignorable. Of course that's unignorable. Like come on, like we're only people. Like you're gonna pay attention to that. But then when they came in, they actually found all these things that were really interesting to them. Some people got excited about identity. Some people got excited about how NFTs could be used to disrupt fan relationships and started exploring that. And maybe they still liked their profile, their PFP because it was cool and different. Maybe they liked interacting anonymously, and NFTs gave this a interesting way to do so that felt sort of anonymous, but also felt like them and had personality. And so, they stuck around even though the prices have gone down, and maybe they like are less stressed about it. And I'll put myself in this category. I found this sort of idealistic vision of what would have been like if Bitcoin had existed, during the Sudanese refugee days that I was in Cairo. But for sure, the reason that it was so in my craw and all around was this sort of explosion of numbers, right? And everyone, going back home for Thanksgiving in November 2017 and seeing Bitcoin race up $1,000 every day, that pulls people in. And so I think that where this leads me is every cycle, there's more kind of not just flowers planted that are blooming, but also entirely new fields of stuff happening that are sort of related, but also separate from each other, that continue to grow even as numbers recede, which is why it's always seemed so stupid to me that critics kind of like howl triumphantly when the number goes down. Like it's just, I don't know what they're paying attention to and how they haven't seen it before, But so I think that, obviously if we can curb some of the excesses and scams and things like that, like those are important things to do. But net, we didn't have, even though there was a lot of hype and a lot of craziness last time, we didn't have the same sort of crazy parabolic run up that, got a ton of people in that lasted for like 5 minutes and then went away, right? It was a much more sort of sustained and casual top. The retreat down has been vicious at times, but it's still kind of reset to this level where it could go down more, but it's not sort of in some weird death spiral, right? The people who are here this time, and of course it's only been 8 months now, 9 months really of bear market, although some argue that the bear market really started in kind of May of last year if you look at things in certain ways. But the point is that the energy in the space is very different than it was at the end of 2018 and in 2019. You're not seeing, like, some people have left NFTs and things like that. I'm using them as an example of the thing that kind of came up, was ridiculous, and then petered off, right? You're not seeing the same sort of, I remember the first, like in 2018, the number of people on my like LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram who are like LA bros who are like, I've decided that my true passion is in the cannabis space. And so I'm going to leave crypto for a while, like, because they were always full of shit, basically. And you don't see that in the same way where, like, sure, some people are paying less attention and they're not worried, like they're not as hyped up about money and stuff, but like still a lot of people who are really excited and they're building things. And, I don't know, I'm less prescriptive about what it has to be in terms of the specifics, and more, there's a sort of energy and attention that I want. And listen, I think that NFTs post crash, guaranteed, will be way awesomer than NFTs pre crash, just because that's the nature of things. There has to be washout. And so I don't know what I want it to look like in 5 years. I think that we're probably trending that way, though. It's just going to be interesting to see where it all ends up.
Totally agree. There are so many more builders now than I think there ever have been in crypto, which is super exciting to see. My last question for you, Nathaniel, is what is a life lesson or habit that has really stuck with you and helped you improve your life?
I think the thing that I'm best at now that I would have been bad at in my 20s is knowing with ruthless clarity what's most important to me. And, I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and being around, available for them is there's nothing, no amount of money that would compel me to kind of fundamentally sacrifice that, right? And that's a privilege that I have. It's not a choice that everyone can make. So in no way am I trying to kind of ascribe that to everyone. But I made this decision a long time ago, even before the pandemic, to work from home, and part of it was with that intention to be around. And it doesn't mean that obviously, at FTX, the hours are very long, but it's different to work long hours if like you get to pop up and see them and do that, like for me, that's where a lot of energy comes from. And because I have that uh utter kind of assuredness on like the one thing, the grounding thing, it turns the volume down on everything from like my normal 12, or 13, which is where my base case is with anything that I'm excited about, to like a comfortable 7 to 9, like 9 when it gets hypey, and then like a nice 7 when it's in normal times. And that to me is so grounding, And so I don't know how you apply that as a lesson. It's more just to kind of, to the extent that there are things that any person can find that make all the other stuff seem clearer or kind of appropriately, I won't say less important, but just appropriately situated in terms of their rank of priorities and importance. I think it's really healthy. And I think, I wish that our conversations about things like work from home and work-life balance and the Great Resignation were less about like, don't give your employer so much of yourself, and more just about kind of understanding how to create a whole life. But that's a subject for a whole different conversation.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And no, I think we should definitely do another episode, maybe less focused on object level things and more just general to crypto and blockchain and the things that you're seeing on your show as well. So definitely invite you back for something like that. But thank you so much for coming on.
Awesome to be here, Tristan. Thanks so much.